It was a Tuesday night, quiet, uneventful. I was working late in my home office, sifting through paperwork for the small construction business I ran. Normally, Haley, my wife of 7 years, would call me on her way home from her yoga class, like clockwork. But that night, the phone didn't ring. I stared at the screen, waiting for her name to pop up like it always did. When it didn't, I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe class ran late. Maybe she stopped to grab something at the store. But an hour passed, then 2, and still nothing. By the time the clock hit 10, I felt the first prickle of unease. Haley was predictable to a fault, someone who thrived on routine. And skipping the call? That wasn't like her. When she finally walked through the door, it was after 11. She was still wearing her yoga leggings, her hair tied up in a messy bun, but something about her seemed off. Her smile was too wide, her tone too chipper as she tossed her keys onto the counter. She apologized for being late, saying there was a new instructor and the class ran longer than usual. I nodded, trying to match her energy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Haley wasn't a great liar, but she thought she was. The first real crack appeared the next morning. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I glanced at it out of habit, expecting it to be one of her girlfriends or a work message. Instead, I saw a name I didn't recognize, Justin. The message preview read, "Last night was incredible." My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. When Haley came out of the bathroom, I casually asked her about yoga. She launched into a detailed explanation about the new instructor, about how challenging the class was, about how she might need a new mat because hers was wearing out. She smiled through the entire story, her voice light and easy. But now I knew what that smile meant. The following nights, I started paying closer attention. She'd always been someone who liked to chat about her day, but now her stories felt rehearsed, overly polished, like she was trying too hard to convince me. She spent more time on her phone, her screen angled away from me, her laughter soft and private as she texted someone late into the evening. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off. "It's just the girl," she'd say. "You wouldn't be interested." I nodded, pretending to accept her excuses. But the name Justin lingered in my mind like a splinter I couldn't remove. On Friday, she told me she was going to a wine night with her friends from work. Her smile was bright, her outfit carefully chosen, a sleek black dress and heels that were more suited to a date than a casual hangout. As she kissed me goodbye, I smiled back, wishing her a good time. Then I waited exactly 5 minutes before grabbing my keys and following her. Her car didn't go to the wine bar downtown, where she claimed her friends were meeting. Instead, it parked outside a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town. A place we'd never been to, a place she'd never mentioned before. I watched from the lot across the street as a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a smug grin, approached her car. She stepped out, laughing as he pulled her into an embrace that lasted far too long. "Justin." I clenched the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Haley had always been the kind of woman who cared about appearances, who insisted on projecting a picture-perfect image of our life together. But now, I was seeing the cracks she tried so hard to hide. I didn't confront her that night. I followed her home, keeping a safe distance, and watched as she walked through the front door, her smile as wide as ever. She kissed me goodnight, smelling faintly of cheap cologne and lies, and climbed into bed without a second thought. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Haley thought she was untouchable, that her lies would never catch up to her. But I wasn't going to sit back and let her destroy what I'd built. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. First, I needed a plan. The next morning, Haley hummed as she poured her coffee, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked like the perfect picture of contentment, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I couldn't look at her without seeing the way she smiled at Justin, the way she leaned into him. It played in my mind like a loop, each repetition stoking the anger I was trying to suppress. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. Her thumb moved quickly, pausing occasionally, her expression unreadable. "What's got you so focused?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She barely glanced up. "Just planning something with the girls," she said, her voice light and airy. I nodded, hiding the tension that gripped my chest. I spent the weekend piecing things together, starting with her phone. While she was in the shower, I took a calculated risk, picking it up from the counter where she'd left it charging. Her lock screen had a 6-digit passcode, but I didn't need to get inside. The notifications told me everything. Justin's name popped up again, along with snippets of their messages. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was perfect. I snapped photos of the screen with my phone, my hands trembling. That evening, I asked her about her weekend plans. She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Oh, nothing too exciting. I might catch a movie with Amanda. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Sounds nice, I said. Let me know if you need me to pick you up. She laughed, waving me off. Don't worry about it. I'll be fine. I watched her carefully, noticing the way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. It was a small tell, one I'd missed before. She was lying. The next step was simple, a GPS tracker. I ordered one online, a sleek little device that attached discreetly to her car. It arrived 2 days later, and I slipped it on her rear bumper while she was inside getting ready for another girls' night. By the time she left, I was already watching her movements in real time. Her car didn't go to Amanda's house. It went to the same bar where I'd seen her meet Justin. I followed at a safe distance, parking in the same lot across the street. This time, I didn't just watch. I took photos. Haley and Justin laughing as they sat at a corner table, her hand resting on his arm, his leaning too close for comfort. When she came home that night, I was sitting on the couch pretending to watch TV. How was the movie? I asked, my tone steady. She grinned, kicking off her heels. Great. Amanda and I had a blast. Her voice was too enthusiastic, her smile too practiced. I nodded, hiding my disgust. That's good, I said. Glad you had fun. She kissed my cheek and headed to bed, leaving me alone in the dark. I spent the next few days gathering more evidence. The tracker showed her movements with precision. Trips to Justin's house, late-night rendezvous at hotels, and even lunchtime meetups at a secluded cafe. I planted a voice recorder in her car, listening to their conversations during those drives. Justin's voice was deep, smooth, filled with confidence. You're amazing, Haley. I can't believe you're married to that guy. She laughed, her tone dismissive. He doesn't even notice anymore. Floyd's too busy with work. The words stung, but they only strengthened my resolve. By the end of the week, I had enough evidence to fill a folder. GPS logs, photos, recordings, even receipts I'd found in her purse. Dinner for two, hotel stays, expensive wine she'd never shared with me. But I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Haley thought she was in control, that her lies were impenetrable. She had no idea the storm I was about to unleash. Haley's lies were so polished, they would have fooled me once. But now, every word she spoke sounded rehearsed. Every excuse felt like a performance. She still believed she was in control, but she was starting to slip, even if she didn't realize it. Her phone never left her hand, and she'd grown more guarded, shutting it off completely when she went to bed. She was careful, but not careful enough. She didn't know I was watching her every move. The tracker sent another alert on Tuesday night. Haley had told me she was grabbing drinks with Amanda again, but her car was parked outside the same boutique hotel downtown. This time, I didn't just sit across the street. I waited 15 minutes before walking into the lobby, acting like a man who had lost track of his wife. The clerk behind the desk looked up as I approached, his smile polite but wary. I'm looking for my wife, I said, glancing at the rows of keys behind him. Haley Reynolds. He hesitated, glancing down at his computer before shaking his head. Sorry, sir. I can't give out guest information. I leaned in, lowering my voice. Look, I know she's here with another man. I just want to know the truth. He hesitated again, his professionalism cracking. After a moment, he gave me a look that said everything I needed to know. I thanked him and left, my suspicions confirmed. That night, when Haley came home, I asked her how her night had gone. She smiled, her voice light. Great. Amanda and I split a bottle of wine and caught up on everything. I nodded, my stomach twisting at the ease with which she lied. That's good, I said. You deserve some fun. Her smile widened, and she kissed me on the cheek before heading to bed. I sat on the couch, staring at the dark screen of the TV, wondering how I'd been so blind for so long. The voice recorder in her car gave me more than I expected. Their conversations were casual at first, filled with laughter and meaningless chatter. But then Justin brought up something that made my blood run cold. What if he finds out? He asked, his tone cautious. Haley laughed, her voice dripping with arrogance. Floyd? He's clueless. He wouldn't notice if I tattooed your name on my forehead. Justin chuckled, but his tone was uneasy. Maybe we should be more careful. She waved him off, her words smug. Stop worrying. I've got this under control. I listened to the recording twice, the anger simmering beneath my skin. Haley thought I was clueless. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. I spent the next few days gathering more evidence. I followed her to the cafe, where she met Justin for lunch, snapping photos from a distance. I checked the tracker logs, compiling a timeline of her movements. I even retrieved old receipts she'd thrown away, piecing together a trail of dinners and hotel stays she hadn't bothered to hide. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed, but I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not until I could make sure she felt every ounce of what she'd done. The first crack appeared when Amanda, her supposed best friend, stopped returning her calls. Haley noticed immediately. Pacing the kitchen one afternoon, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She's not answering, she said, her voice sharp. I don't understand why. Maybe she's busy, I offered, keeping my tone neutral. Haley shook her head, frustration flashing in her eyes. No, it's not like her. Something's wrong. I hid my smirk, knowing exactly why Amanda had gone silent. She'd been one of the first to receive the photos. Anonymously, of course. Haley still didn't suspect anything. She thought she was untouchable, that her lies were unbreakable. But the cracks were widening, and I was about to bring the whole house down. Haley's world was starting to shift, though she was too arrogant to realize just how much. The signs were subtle at first, a missed call here, a strained conversation there. But they were there. Her friends weren't as warm anymore. Amanda had stopped returning her texts altogether, and Haley was increasingly irritated, pacing the house with her phone in hand. She still thought she was in control. She had no idea I was the one pulling the strings. I sent the next message to her boss. It was simple, an email from an anonymous account, attaching a few of the photos I'd taken of Haley and Justin. Along with the pictures, I included a message that read, "One of your employees, Haley Reynolds, has been engaging in inappropriate behavior during work hours. These photos were taken on her lunch breaks." The response was almost immediate. By the next day, Haley came home with a storm cloud over her head. She threw her bag onto the counter and poured herself a glass of wine without a word. I watched her from the living room, waiting for her to speak. "They're investigating me," she said finally, her tone sharp and clipped. "Someone's been spreading lies about me at work." "Lies?" I asked, feigning concern. She nodded, her grip tightening on the wine glass. "Photos, messages, everything. They think I've been unprofessional." "That's ridiculous," I said, keeping my tone even. "Do you know who might have sent them?" Her jaw clenched, and she shook her head. "No," she snapped. "Good, I thought. Let her stew." Her social circle was next. Using the burner phone, I sent another batch of photos to Katie, her second closest friend. "I thought you should know what Haley's been up to." Attached are photos proving her affair. "You deserve the truth." Haley noticed the fallout almost immediately. Katie stopped replying to her messages, and when they bumped into each other at the grocery store, the conversation was short and awkward. When Haley came home that evening, she was fuming. "Katie's being weird," she said, slamming the fridge door shut. "She barely spoke to me. I don't understand what's going on." "Maybe she's just busy," I offered, suppressing a smile. Haley shot me a glare, but didn't argue. Justin was starting to pull away, too. The voice recorder in her car picked up several tense conversations between them. "I think someone's watching us," Justin said during one drive. "This isn't safe anymore, Haley." Her laugh was brittle. "You're overreacting. Nobody knows." "I'm serious," he insisted. "I don't want my name dragged into this." "You're being paranoid," she snapped, her tone defensive. But there was an edge to her voice now, a crack in her confidence. The final step was the financials. Haley had always relied on me to manage our accounts, never bothering to check the details. She'd grown comfortable living in the illusion that everything was stable. She didn't notice when I transferred half of our joint savings into a private account. She didn't notice when I canceled the credit card she used for her personal expenses. But she noticed when the card declined at the boutique she loved. She came home that evening with a look of panic, waving the card in the air. "Why isn't this working?" she demanded. I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. "Must be a banking error," I said. "I'll call tomorrow." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't press further. Piece by piece, her life was unraveling. Her job was under scrutiny, her friends were turning away, her lover was growing distant, and her financial security was slipping through her fingers. And she still didn't know I was the one orchestrating it all. Haley thought she was untouchable, but the web was tightening, and soon, she'd have nowhere left to run. Haley's confidence, once unshakable, was slipping. She moved through the house like a ghost, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, her smile forced and brittle. Her once effortless lies were growing strained. She didn't volunteer stories about her day anymore, didn't laugh as freely as she once had. The cracks in her facade were widening, and I was watching every piece fall apart. It started with her job. The investigation at work escalated quickly, spurred by the photos and logs I'd sent anonymously. Haley came home one afternoon looking pale, her hands trembling as she set her bag on the counter. "They've suspended me," she said, her voice tight, "pending further review." She poured herself a drink, downing it in one gulp before slamming the glass onto the counter. I leaned against the doorway, keeping my expression neutral. Why would they do that? Her eyes darted away, her fingers twitching against the counter. "They think I've been inappropriate," she muttered. "But it's all lies. Someone's trying to ruin me." I nodded slowly, letting her words hang in the air. "That's awful," I said. "Do you know who's behind it?" She shook her head, her frustration boiling over. "I don't know, but when I find out..." Her words trailed off, and she stormed out of the room. Good, I thought. Let her stew in the chaos she'd created. Justin was next to abandon her. The voice recorder picked up their final argument in the car, his tone sharp and unyielding. "I'm done, Haley," he said. "This isn't worth it anymore. You can't just walk away," she shot back, her voice breaking. "We've been through too much for you to just quit." "I can't afford to keep doing this," he said. "Whoever's watching us isn't going to stop." "Nobody's watching," she hissed. "Then explain the photos," he snapped. The sound of tires screeching filled the recording, followed by the slamming of a car door. Justin was gone, and Haley was left sitting in silence. When she came home that evening, her face was pale, her shoulders slumped. I asked her how her day had been, my voice casual. She didn't answer, walking straight past me to the bedroom. The door closed behind her, and I sat on the couch, listening to the muffled sound of her sobbing. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something, sympathy, maybe, or regret. But then I remembered her lies, her betrayal, the way she'd laughed at my supposed cluelessness. The pang faded. Her friends had fully turned against her by this point. Katie had been the last to respond to her messages, but even that lifeline was gone now. I'd sent Katie a second batch of photos, this time with timestamps and detailed descriptions of Haley's meetings with Justin. Haley confronted her in person, but their conversation ended in a shouting match in the middle of a cafe. By the time Haley got home, she was shaking with anger. "Everyone's turning against me," she said, pacing the living room. "Katie, Amanda, work, everyone. It's like someone's sabotaging me." I nodded, my expression sympathetic. "That's terrible," I said. "But why would anyone do that?" Her eyes flashed, but she didn't respond. She was starting to suspect something, but she couldn't quite put the pieces together. The financial blow came next. Her card declined again, this time at the grocery store. She called me in a panic, her voice frantic. "Something's wrong with the account," she said. "There's no money. Did you move anything?" I feigned confusion. "That's strange," I said. "I'll call the bank and check." By the time she got home, she was on the verge of a meltdown. "I don't understand what's happening," she said, her voice trembling. "Everything's falling apart." I looked at her, my expression calm. "Maybe it's time to come clean," I said. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaking. I shrugged, standing to leave the room. Just something to think about. Haley's world was collapsing, and she had no idea I was the one tearing it down. The trap was set, the walls were closing in, and soon, she'd have nowhere left to run. Haley was unraveling, and it was starting to show. Her once pristine appearance was now frayed. Dark circles under her eyes, hurried makeup, mismatched outfits. The spark of arrogance that had defined her was dimming, replaced by the flicker of someone barely holding on. She was still trying to maintain control, still clinging to the belief that her life hadn't completely fallen apart. But I was about to strip away the last of her illusions. The final straw came when the bank notified her of the drained savings account. She came into the living room holding the letter, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Did you do this?" she asked, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. I looked up from the book I was reading, raising an eyebrow. "Do what?" "This," she snapped, shoving the letter at me. "The savings account is empty." "Where did the money go?" I took the letter, glancing at it briefly before setting it aside. "I moved it," I said simply, my tone calm. Her jaw dropped, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You moved it? Without telling me? That's our money, Floyd." I stood, my movements slow and deliberate. "It was our money, Haley. But seeing as you've been spending your time and effort on someone else, I figured it was time to protect myself." She froze, her face draining of color. "What are you talking about?" she asked, though her voice wavered. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice sharp. I walked to the kitchen counter, where I'd placed a folder of evidence earlier that day. Picking it up, I handed it to her. "Take a look," I said. She hesitated, her hands shaking as she opened the folder. The first thing she saw was a photo of her and Justin at the hotel, his hand on her back as they walked inside. Her breath caught, her eyes flicking to me before flipping to the next page. Text messages, GPS logs, receipts, more photos. "This," she stammered. "This isn't what it looks like." I let out a bitter laugh. "Don't insult me, Haley. It's exactly what it looks like." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel the usual tug of sympathy. This wasn't the woman I'd married. This was someone who had lied to my face for months, who had mocked my trust and taken advantage of my love. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, my tone icy. "Meeting him at hotels, sneaking around behind my back, lying to me every single day. That's not a mistake, Haley. That's a choice." She sank onto the couch, clutching the folder like it was a lifeline. "I'm sorry," she said finally, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted to hurt you." I crossed my arms, staring down at her. "You didn't just hurt me, Haley. You destroyed everything we had. And now, you're going to face the consequences." Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means we're done," I said, my voice steady. "The divorce papers are in that folder. You can either sign them, or we can take this to court." She stared at me, her tears falling faster. "You're serious?" I nodded. "Dead serious." That night, Haley packed her things in silence. She didn't argue, didn't try to change my mind. Her excuses and justifications had run out, leaving her with nothing but the reality of her choices. When she stood by the door with her suitcases, she turned to me one last time. "Floyd," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." I met her gaze, my expression cold. "Goodbye, Haley." She hesitated for a moment, then walked out, the sound of her suitcase wheels fading into the night. The house was quiet after she left, but it wasn't the suffocating silence I'd expected. It was peaceful, free. The silence in the house after Haley left wasn't oppressive. It was liberating. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of her lies hanging over me. Her departure left traces. An empty closet, her favorite mug still in the cabinet, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. But these remnants felt more like artifacts of a life I no longer recognized. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was ready to move on. Haley didn't stay quiet for long. A week after she left, she sent a long, rambling email. "Floyd, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need to explain. I was lost, confused, and I didn't mean for things to happen the way they did. I'm so sorry for everything. Please, can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a while, the words blurring together. She wasn't lost or confused. She was calculated, deliberate, and I didn't need her apologies. I deleted the email without replying. The whispers about her affair spread quickly. Her once pristine reputation was in tatters, her social circle shrinking by the day. Amanda and Katie, her closest friends, had cut her off entirely after seeing the photos. Even Justin had disappeared from her life, leaving her with no allies to lean on. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she'd taken a job at a small retail store in another town. It was a far cry from the boutique manager position she'd once bragged about. She was starting over. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I spent my days throwing myself into my work. My construction business, once a source of stress, became a refuge. I poured my energy into every project, finding satisfaction in creating something tangible, something lasting. At night, I worked on the house, repainting the walls, rearranging the furniture, removing every trace of Haley's influence. The house wasn't just mine, it felt like home for the first time in years. One evening, while organizing my garage, I found an old box of photos. It was filled with memories of our early years, wedding pictures, vacations, holidays. I flipped through them, feeling a mix of nostalgia and bitterness. There was a time when those moments had felt real, but now they were just fragments of a life that had fallen apart. I took the box to the fire pit in the backyard and burned every last photo. The flames consumed the past, leaving only ashes. It was cathartic. Haley's attempts to reach out didn't stop. She left a voicemail a few weeks later, her voice shaky and filled with regret. "Floyd, I just need to talk to you. Please, one chance. I know I messed up, but I still care about you." I listened to the message once, then deleted it. She didn't deserve my time, my attention, or my forgiveness. The turning point came when I met someone new. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't rushed. Her name was Allison, a graphic designer I met at a client's house while renovating their kitchen. She was sharp, funny, and completely unpretentious, the polar opposite of Haley. Our conversations were easy, her laughter contagious. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of something real. The past no longer felt like a weight I was carrying. Haley's betrayal had been unwound, but it had healed into a scar, a reminder of what I'd endured, but not something that defined me. And as Allison and I walked through the park one evening, her hand slipping into mine, I realized something. I was happy. Allison and I didn't rush into anything. She was patient, never prying into my past, and let me open up on my own terms. I appreciated that. After Haley, the thought of trusting someone again had felt impossible, but Allison made it easier. We spent our time simply, dinners at quiet restaurants, hiking trails I hadn't been on in years, sitting on the porch talking about everything and nothing. With her, there were no games, no secrets. It was honest, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to keep my guard up. Haley's absence in my life became more of a distant echo than a lingering pain. I stopped wondering where she was or what she was doing. Her calls and messages slowed, then stopped altogether, leaving only silence. It was the kind of closure I hadn't expected. Not a dramatic confrontation, but the quiet realization that I no longer cared. The business was thriving. With my head clear and my energy refocused, I started taking on bigger projects, even hiring a small team to help with the workload. Clients were happy, referrals were rolling in, and for the first time in years, I felt proud of what I'd built. Allison offered to design a new logo and website for the business. Her creativity and attention to detail impressed me, and we spent hours bouncing ideas off each other. It wasn't just a business improvement. It was a partnership, a collaboration that brought us closer. One evening, as we sat by the fire pit in the backyard, Allison turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "You've been through a lot," she said softly. "It's amazing how far you've come." I stared into the flames, her words sinking in. Sometimes I didn't think I'd make it through, I admit it. But I had to. Staying in that place, letting it define me, it wasn't an option. She reached out, her hand resting lightly on mine. "You didn't just make it through, Floyd. You built something better." Her words stayed with me. As the months passed, our relationship deepened. It wasn't perfect, no relationship is, but it was healthy, honest, and built on mutual respect. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe freely. Haley's betrayal had left scars, but they no longer felt raw. They were just reminders of a time I'd left behind, lessons I'd learned the hard way. One day, while cleaning out the last of the old storage boxes, I found a letter Haley had written during the divorce. It was a long, rambling mess of apologies, excuses, and pleas for forgiveness. I kept it without knowing why, shoving it into a box and forgetting about it. This time, I read it. She blamed her actions on loneliness, on my long work hours, on feeling unappreciated. But between the lines, it was clear she was still deflecting, refusing to take full responsibility. When I finished reading, I tore the letter in half and threw it in the trash. It wasn't anger that drove the act. It was freedom. That night, as I sat with Allison, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The past no longer felt like a weight, it was just a story I'd outgrown. And as I looked at her, her laughter lighting up the room, I realized something I hadn't thought possible. I was ready to trust again. Life felt lighter than it had in years. With Allison by my side, the past seemed like a distant memory, a chapter closed and filed away. She brought a warmth and steadiness to my life that I hadn't realized I was missing. We'd settled into a rhythm, balancing her creative energy with my practical nature. Our days were filled with work, laughter, and plans for the future. Haley wasn't a topic of conversation anymore. She wasn't a lingering presence in my thoughts. She was just gone. One afternoon, I ran into a mutual acquaintance at the hardware store. We exchanged pleasantries, catching up on surface-level details, until they brought up Haley. "Did you hear she's moved again?" they asked, their tone curious. I shook my head, shrugging. "No, I hadn't." "Yeah," they said. "Apparently, she's trying to start over somewhere new. She's working at a department store. It's a far cry from where she was." Their words didn't stir anything in me. No anger, no satisfaction, no pity. Just a quiet understanding that her life was no longer my concern. I smiled politely, changing the subject. Allison and I had started discussing the idea of a long-term commitment. It wasn't something we rushed into, but the thought of building a future with her felt natural. She didn't push or pressure me. She just let the conversation unfold at its own pace. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about where you were a year ago?" she asked. I paused, stirring the pot of sauce, before nodding. "All the time," I admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago." She smiled, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "You've come so far, Floyd. I hope you see that." I did. For the first time, I truly did. The business continued to grow, thanks in no small part to Allison's creative contributions. Her designs drew in new clients, and our partnership became a cornerstone of our success. One day, after finishing a large renovation project, she surprised me with a gift, a framed blueprint of our first collaboration, with a small note at the bottom. The first of many. It hung in my office as a constant reminder of what we'd built together. Haley made one last attempt to contact me. It came as a letter, much like the one I'd torn up months ago. This time, though, I didn't bother to read it. I placed it unopened into the trash. Her words didn't matter anymore. Allison and I took a trip to the mountains that fall, a place I'd always loved but hadn't visited in years. The air was crisp, the leaves vibrant with reds and golds, and the quiet of the trails brought a sense of peace I hadn't realized I needed. As we stood at the edge of a cliff, looking out over the valley, she slipped her hand into mine. "You're happy," she said, her tone more of a statement than a question. I nodded, smiling. "Yeah," I said. "I really am." The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. Haley's betrayal had once been a storm that I thought would break me. Instead, it had cleared the way for something better, something stronger. As I stood there with Allison, the wind tugging at my jacket, I felt the full weight of how far I'd come. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The days blended into seasons, each one carrying me further from the wreckage Haley had left behind. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good, honest, steady in mine. Allison became more than just my partner in business. She became the person I trusted most, the one who reminded me every day that love didn't have to come with conditions or deceit. She didn't try to erase my past, but she never let it define me either. With her, I felt like the best version of myself. Haley's name came up less and less, even among the acquaintances who once gossiped about her. I didn't ask for updates, didn't search for traces of her online. She was a shadow that had faded entirely, leaving no room in my life for regret or bitterness. Every now and then, I'd find myself wondering if she'd ever truly understood the consequences of her actions. But the thought didn't linger. It didn't matter anymore. One evening, as Allison and I sat in the backyard watching the fire pit crackle, she turned to me with a soft smile. "You're different," she said, her voice quiet but sure. I raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Different how?" She shrugged, tilting her head thoughtfully. "Lighter, like you've let go of something that was weighing you down." I considered her words, the truth of them settling over me like a warm blanket. "I guess I have," I admitted. "It took a while, but I got there." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "I'm proud of you, you know." I didn't respond right away, letting the moment stretch between us. Her words weren't just kind, they were freeing. The business continued to thrive, becoming a reflection of the life Allison and I had built together. Clients loved the dynamic we brought to projects, and referrals kept pouring in. One day, as we wrapped up a meeting with a new client, she turned to me with a grin. "We make a good team," she said. I nodded, smiling back. "The best." The house had become a home in every sense of the word. The walls that had once echoed with tension and lies were now filled with warmth and laughter. Allison had added her own touches, bright, colorful art on the walls, cozy furniture that invited conversation, a garden bursting with wildflowers in the backyard. It was no longer a reminder of what I'd lost. It was a celebration of what I'd gained. One afternoon, as we walked through a park, Allison stopped suddenly, looking at me with an expression that was both serious and kind. "Do you think you'd ever forgive her?" she asked, her voice careful. I thought about the question, turning it over in my mind. "I don't think it's about forgiveness," I said finally. "It's about acceptance. She made her choices, and I made mine. That's all there is to it." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Fair enough," she said. And that was the end of it. As the months turned into years, I realized something that I hadn't expected. The best revenge wasn't what I'd done to Haley. It wasn't the way her lies unraveled or the consequences she'd faced. The best revenge was building a life that made her irrelevant. That night, as I sat on the porch with Allison, the stars scattered above us like tiny beacons of light, I felt a profound sense of peace. The past no longer held me. The future was mine to create, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take me. What do you guys think of my story? Share in the comments what you think about the choice I made, and would you do in my situation?